Welcome to This Week in AML. I'm Elliot Berman from AML RightSource, and I'm here with my colleague, John Byrne. John, I thought maybe this week we could talk about FinCEN's release earlier in the week regarding enforcement cases that were brought by law enforcement that were significantly impacted by various BSA filings. If I'm not mistaken, that announcement was in connection with FinCEN's Directors Law Enforcement Awards program. The announcement contained 7 cases. Which ones caught your eye, John?
Yeah, I think everybody should take a look at all 7. It's really interesting examples of different agencies and their involvement, both using BSA data and working together. But a couple of them I thought were worthy of more focus than perhaps the others. One is there's an FBI investigation that looked at what was termed fraudulent activities of a law firm, which is pretty clear, based on allegations that the attorneys targeted distressed homeowners with false promise of loan modifications and legal representations. This was in Utah. So a task force was created with a whole bunch of entities: Utah Department of Consumer Protection, Attorney General's Office, IRS, FDIC, a really good plethora of agency support. And the employees at the firm, this is unbelievable. They use mass mailings and call centers to track customers, getting a lot of upfront fees. And there's a lot of other things in there, but I thought the key, Elliot, for me was that the task force officials looked at, they said over 100 BSA filings that would lead them to new subjects and victims throughout the United States. So a really good example of using the data in a very important way. And then they charged 8 subjects. Losses were about $42 million. And then the U.S. Attorney's Office in Utah prosecuted the case. So really good example of working together. Another one, sort of referencing an earlier podcast we did with IRS, was one on cyber threat. And this was an ICE investigation. They work with Secret Service, Postal, and they looked at data to identify dark web vendors involved in narcotic sales. So again, another good example of a big problem in the cyber world. So I thought that was worthy of reference. And then there was one where the FBI, they initiated an investigation after OFAC blocked about $2 million in transit from a Hong Kong entity that was a shell company for a North Korean bank that was known to be a proliferator of WMDs. So the company operated in such a manner that the North Korean bank had access to the U.S. financial system. So again, a lot of data reviewed by the FBI. OFAC obviously was engaged here as well. And so they were able to show that the Hong Kong-based company was used strictly as a shell to clear those funds. And then shortly after, they issued a seizure warrant. A Chinese national used by the North Koreans as a bank liaison was sanctioned along with the Hong Kong company itself. So great examples. And I would say here, the important part of this is they're issuing awards for law enforcement. FinCEN's getting all this together. And again, showing the value proposition of CTRs, SARs, and related BSA data.
Yeah, I thought the other thing that was interesting about that Hong Kong shell company case was the fact that law enforcement used 314A and 314B to seek out, targeted information and then get some shared information, which reminds us that while those programs seem kind of every day, that they really can be very valuable for investigative purposes. So, John, I know we're supposed to limit ourselves to one topic, but there was one other thing this week. I noticed that the comptroller of the currency is stepping down. So what do you think about that?
Really interesting. Wasn't in space very long. Comptroller Otting. One of the things that struck me is, at least in the BSA space, he was the only head of an agency to advocate for raising the CTR threshold and really didn't play in the sandbox with the other agencies. So really interesting that he leaves now. And if you look at the press release talks about the value he brought to the AML infrastructure. I'm going to have to check that out.
All right. Well, thanks, John. And thanks all for listening. We'll talk to you next week on This Week in AML.